Hey guys, welcome to Web World Tech. In this video, I'm going to share one of my recent experience, where I was a part of a webinar which was done by Redbus team, Frontend Tech. So we have captured that video, and I want to share that experience with all of my audience, you guys. So please go ahead, watch it. Hope it helps you. And this experience with Redbus team was really great. So let's start the webinar session.
Welcome to the first of a series of technical webinars from the stables of Redbus. I'm Anoop. I'm part of the engineering team at Redbus. For the hopefully limited few here who do not know about Redbus, Redbus is the world's largest online bus ticketing platform. Redbus started out in India way back in 2006, 15 years ago in that sense, and now operates in 5 different countries outside of India, in Southeast Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and in Latin America, Peru and Colombia. And hopefully over the next few months, we'll be adding a few more countries. Today, we are here to kind of talk about some of the things we have been doing in our web platform and the mobile web platform, browser platform, right? Now, the interesting question which a lot of you, especially if you're coming in from India or from the rest of the world, may ask is, why browsers? I mean, today everybody is on the app, right? Whether it's on the iOS apps or Android apps. But if you really look at it, and if you talk to any company which is out there doing transactions, a lot of our traffic still comes on our browser platform, because a lot of people continue to search, discover applications and tools on browsers or on search services like Google and Bing, and they tend to kind of use the browser or the mobile web browser as the first port of call to kind of understand what is being offered. However, usually in most cases, what happens is that this channel, because the overall conversion may not be as healthy, becomes almost almost something which a company does not look at on a very serious mode. But at Redbus, what we've tried to do is to try and enable a lot more engineering behind this two platforms, the browser, to try and get and provide a lot of great experience to the customers, whether it's in terms of speed of access, whether it's in terms of getting them to have a much better experience when accessing the platforms on our desktop and mobile web platforms, right? So what all are we going to cover today? Obviously, when it comes to overall development, whether to make certain things consistent, whether it is to see improvement on the platforms, on the production platforms, or in terms of the thing, there are multiple parts which we need to kind of address. The first thing we'll be covering is around our component library platform, which has really helped our developers improve their productivity, so to say, and provide a very consistent experience on our platforms. The second thing we would be covering is things around how we have managed to improve our overall conversion rates, improve our overall performance, and what we have done with the core web vitals. And finally, how are we monitoring and ensuring that continuing to look what we are doing, is that working in the right direction? What are the interventions we need to do? Today we have Kaushal and Anjali who are going to talk to us about the component library. We have Pallavi and Ankita talking us through the core web vitals, and we have Faiza and Apurva talking about the monitoring and observability parts. Over to you, Kaushal, to take us through the first aspect of it.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm going to talk about component library. So, component library is an isolated cloud-based folder. There we store all the design parts of our website or a piece of a software. a common goal that's been shared by all of us developers is to maximize the reusability of code that we write at any point of time. And for that, component library helps us a lot. At Redbus, we have decided to create multiple reusable components inside component library that will eventually help us to increase our efficiency and work seamlessly. So the first question that comes in our mind, like why component library? See, like in the old times, we can check, if we are going to create a particular code, or like piece of code for a particular app or a particular project, it is very hard to reuse that particular thing in some other place. So like there are the following ways by which component library help us. The first one is that collaborate efficiently with speed. So if you see, like if multiple people are working in a similar kind of project or the similar kind of requirement, component library help us or basically enable us to collaborate between them and share the responsibility. So it will eventually lead up to the speed the development process. The second point is consistency in the UI. Component library help us to create the standards in our development process and the design. So just for example, if you see mobile website of Redbus, we can see like the header part of our website will have the same design and the similar kind of functionality across the app or across the website you can see, and because it's been created at a single place and it's been used in multiple places due to component library. The next point is reusability. Yeah, so as I have told you, like component library help us to create a component in a common place and try to like help us to reuse it in multiple places. And by using component library, it basically makes it very easy. You can just import a component from that component library and use it at multiple places in multiple apps or multiple projects that we want. The next point is the customization and flexibility. See, when we are creating a component in a isolated place, we can increase the scope of reusing that component in multiple places. Just by creating multiple types of that component. Just for an example, if you want to create a checkbox, we can create multiple types of checkbox. Like one is the default checkbox with some default colors and default design, and then we can create some other kind of checkbox with some specific functionality with some specific design or some icons kind of way that we can create. And and the third one itself is you can assume of as a toggle kind of a checkbox that we can create. So that will eventually help us to increase the scope of reusability of that component in multiple places. And when it comes to flexibility, component library help us to create multiple versions of the same component and help us to like even release the newer version if you think of any improvement in that. The last point is the robust and lesser bugs. Since we are creating this component in an isolated place, we can try to simulate all the possible test cases for that component and basically make sure like our code will work fine. And by using multiple technologies like library or library like TypeScript or ESLint, we can make sure our code will work fine. Yeah. Now it comes to atomic design. So if you see, like inside Redbus, we have adopted atomic design methodology to create multiple components in our code base. So it is in simple terms. First, we are going to create atoms. Then we are that is a very small component or a small UI element that we can tell. And by combining a couple of them, we are going to create a bigger component that is known as molecules. And similarly, we are going to create some more bigger component and some more meaningful component that is not an organism by combining a couple of molecules. Similarly, by combining a couple of organisms, we can create a template, and those templates can be reused to make multiple pages in our code base or in our app. So here is an example that we can see. Here, like we have some items like button, icons, 10 cards, link, input box, some primary button, all these things we have. By combining a couple of these items, we have created some molecules like the header part, the search widget part, the footer part, the cards content and all these things that we have created as a molecule. Then again, by combining a couple of molecules, here we have created the such with some of the card functionality that is been created as an organism. Then we have created this footer part with completely uh, the independent functionality that we can tell. And then again, by combining a couple of organisms, here we can see like we have created one template of our home page. So here you can see like this particular template can be used in multiple places to create pages in our website. So here's an example of our bus booking website homepage. But similar kind of template can be used in multiple places to create the similar kind of UI. Like just an example, in Redbus we have different ticket booking platform, not only in bus. Like we have the example of train and ferry. There we can use the similar template to create multiple pages. So yeah, implementation details will be covered by Anjali.
Thanks, Kaushal. So till now we have seen why we decided to use an in-house component library in Redbus and its benefits. Now let's look into some of the implementation details of the same. The tech stack that we use to build an in-house component library mainly consists of React and TypeScript, React Storybook, Style Components, and Lerna. Let's look into each one of them now. First, we have React and TypeScript. React, as we all know, is the most popular framework used in front-end projects. It's a JavaScript-based library that is used to build user interfaces and components, which is maintained by Facebook and a couple of individual companies. And TypeScript is the most commonly used tool that's used to add static type definitions. It enables us to basically describe the shape of an object, which provides better documentation and also allows us to validate whether the code that we wrote is working correctly or not. TypeScript also helps us to implement coding rules, which in turn helps us in being easier to read and debug the code. And we have also seen a significant reduction in the UI bugs after implementing TypeScript in our production code bases. Next, we have React Storybook, which is the main base of our component library. Storybook is basically a development environment and a visual playground for the UI components. It enables us to create the components independently and showcase them in a separate interface. It basically means that the Storybook remains outside of your main React application and the components can be created in isolation without worrying much about the business logic. Next, we have Style Components. In the recent years, we have seen an increasing adoption of JavaScript, JS-based frameworks, and other build processes in every front-end project. In a similar fashion, CSS has also found its way into JavaScript. Style component is one such way wherein we can use CSS along with the modern JavaScript by utilizing the template literals. Style components is commonly known as the visual primitives for the component's age. It is meant to be a successor of CSS, wherein we have a way to write CSS that tightly scoped to a single element and not leak to any other elements in the page. By this, we mean that when we create a style component, we are creating nothing but a normal React component which has the styles tightly coupled to it. Lastly, we have Lerna. Lerna is basically a tool that helps to optimize managing multi-packaged repositories with the help of Git and NPM. Here in Redbus, we have used Lerna along with NPM to publish the versions and manage the components that we have created. So let's look into an example of one component that we created, which is an accordion. And in the screenshots below, we can see how the accordion component is getting reused in multiple internal projects that we have. By creating one such component itself, we were able to customize the properties like the background color, or the font color, etc. We were also able to change the open and close icon that is there for the accordion. We could also customize the open and close behavior, whether it should be a slide down or just an open and close. So by creating just one component, we were able to customize it and use it based on the design requirements of the specific pages. So in Redbus, we generally follow a similar design structure across several of our internal projects. And often we would have use cases wherein a single component is being design element is being used in several of our internal projects that we have. So by creating a component library, it has been easier for us to standardize our development and also reduce code duplications by able to create component in a single place and reuse it based on the requirements in the different projects. Till now, we have created almost 250 to 300 components, which is used across multiple projects within Redbus, like Redbus Mobile Web, Redbus Desktop, BuzzBuddy, packages, etc., to name a few. We have also seen a significant reduction of approximately 20 to 30% in the dev efforts and timelines by using the components that already existed in our component library. We have not only created the components for our internal purposes, but also made a few of them open source so that the developer community outside Redbus can also leverage the benefits of it. We'll be seeing a quick demo of the open source component library in a couple of minutes. As a next step, we are currently working towards 100% componentization and planning to implement our UI components in more and more internal projects that we have. We'll also be updating the open source library with the new components that we create as and when we create them. Now let's have a quick demo of the component library that we have created. So this is an overview of the component library that we have. Here we have the visual representation of the components on the right side, and on the left side, we can see the entire list of components that is currently there. As Kaushal had mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have followed the atomic design methodology and grouped our components into atoms, molecules, and templates based on the structure of the same. Let's look into a component in detail, which is a radio button. As we can see here, within the radio button itself, we have created different versions of it, like the default radio button, slider radio button, custom radio button, so that it can be customized and reused as per the design requirements that we have. And here we have the entire list of the props that in the control section, we have the entire list of props that the component takes. And here we can play around with all these props that is here, and we can see how the component is reacting to it. So by this, we get an idea of what all the props are there for a particular component and how the component reacts to the changes that we make in the specific props. This will be easier, make it easier for us to use the component if required. And we also have a clear documentation section for the components that we have, wherein we have the entire list of props and the possible data types that it has, and so that we can get a clear idea of the possible values it takes along with its data type and how to pass it. And here we have a code section wherein we'll be able to get the source code of it and get an idea of how the props is being passed and how we can plug in the component to our application as required. Now let's look into another molecule that we created, which is the passenger details input form. This is the molecule that we are using in the custom flow page of our mobile web application. And here, this component is a combination of several atoms like the input component. Then we have the checkbox, toggle button, etc. So by combining these atoms, we are able to create the molecule that we can see. And similar to the other atom we saw, we have the document section and the controls for this component as well, so that it will be easier to get a clear idea and how to use the component. We have also made the code of these components open source so that it can be cloned and used by the others. We'll have a quick demo of that as well. So this is the public GitHub repository for the component library that we have created. And here we have the clear documentation and the installation steps of the code base. If required, and if you can take the clone of this repo and set it up in your local by simply using the steps that we have provided. And now let's look into the code hierarchy that is there. So in the packages section, we have the entire list of packages that is currently created in the component library that we have. We'll look into some more details of one component that is the radio button, which we saw earlier. So here again, we have the list of all the props that it takes so that it will be there in a consolidated place. And here, as we can see, the props of the component, we are passing pretty much everything like with height, color, background, etc. so that the look and feel of the component can be customized as per our design requirements. And we were able to create just one component, and using these props that we are accepting, we were able to create the different versions of it as per the design requirements that we have. So in this manner, we will be able to customize the components based on our requirements. Now let's have a look at how we can pass the different set of props to get a clear idea of how the versions work. And here we have the radio button data, and here we can see how we have set, we are passing all the different set of data to the specific component to get the different versions. Like for example, we can see that here using the radio button type, we are changing it to default radio and slider to control like which version of the component that we want to use. And in this particular manner, by using this one component, we can reuse it in multiple ways as per our design requirements. With that, we come to the end of the topic, component library. Thank you.
Hey, thanks Kaushal and thanks Anjali for walking us through the RB component library. That really helped us understand how the component library has helped Redbus to create I think I lost people there. Sorry. Thank you, Kaushal and Anjali. And I hope people out there are aware as to how the RB component library has helped us create collaborative pages and pages which are very flexible with relative ease. I would request all of you to check out the open source component library, and we have kind of added the link to the end of this presentation, and we would be sharing that on our handles as well, both on Twitter, LinkedIn, and all the other places. I just want to call out, while we are already getting some questions, anybody who has any questions on whatever topics we have been discussing or we would be discussing in the rest of the webinar, please do post them on LinkedIn. We have people, we will respond to them there. Also, I would want to call out that in addition to the speakers, we have Amit, Gautam, and Jagdish in the background on LinkedIn, waiting to respond to all the queries that you will have. With that, I'll kind of hand it over to Pallavi and Ankita to take us through the Core Web Vitals activities. Over to you, Pallavi.
Thanks, Anup. So the next topic that we'll be discussing will be Core Web Vitals. So Web Vitals is an initiative that's been introduced by Google, which provides guidance in identifying the ways in which we can optimize the quality of user experience on our website. So Core Web Vitals is a subset of Web Vitals, and it focuses on three main aspects. We have CLS, which deals with visual stability, LCP for loading experience, and FID for interactivity. So the first Core Web Vital that we'll discuss will be CLS, cumulative layout shift. So by definition, CLS is the movement of page elements loaded on the page to a different position from their existing position due to some unexpected factors. So there might have been a time on some website where you would have clicked on the wrong button when your intention was to click on some other button because of an advertisement that shows up. So one such example that you can see here is in this animation where the user is trying to tap on the change date button, but instead he ends up clicking on the cancel ticket button because of the banner that shows up at the very top. So this is due to the lack of visual stability on that page. Now, in terms of what a good CLS score is, your CLS score can be as low as 0 for completely static pages and will increase as and when the layout shifts occurring on your page also increase. So according to Google's performance tools, a score that is below 0.1 is considered to be good. Anything that is between 0.1 to 0.25 needs improvement, and anything above 0.25 is considered to be poor. As far as how we can measure the CLS score, there are a couple of ways in which we can do so. Some of them include Lighthouse, which is part of Chrome DevTools, and even the rendering options. So we'll take a look at a couple of these ways towards the end of the presentation. Now, in order to understand how we can optimize CLS, we have to understand what the contributors are. So Google recommends that you don't do some of the following. So the first is images without dimensions. Now, with the adaptation of responsive design, we started adding image dimensions as part of our CSS files. So while this was good for responsive design, it caused a negative impact on our CLS score. So the reason here is because there might be a delay in loading that relevant CSS file. So space is allocated after the browser starts downloading that image. So the simple solution here would be to allocate space for your images. We then have advertisements. So we can tie this back to the animation that we saw earlier. So these are usually added with the intention of trying to push certain promotions or offers and other features. So what these end up doing is they will reset and resize our container, which will in turn cause a CLS issue. We also have dynamically injected content. So this includes app installation banners, iframe injections, third-party content, which might be used for marketing purposes and so on. We also have actions waiting for a network response. So a component should not decide to render based off of the API response. Now consider a web page, you'll have multiple API calls which provide data to render a specific component. Now, for whatever reason, if there is a delay in that API response, or if you're on a slow network, that component will be injected into the DOM at a later point and will cause CLS. So apart from these contributors, we also have fonts, animations, and transitions, which can be an issue as well. So with all of these contributors in mind, we made certain optimizations on our page. The first being that we added image dimensions. We also fixed certain dimensions for certain components. We created fallback components and placeholders for certain banners, which are found at the top and the middle sections of our pages. We moved interstitial cards, which were found between our pages, to the bottom such that they were not visible on the initial load. And we even changed up some of our animations and loaders, which we were using on our page. So you can see here that for a certain page, we started with a score of nearly 1.3 in the red zone. And with all of these optimizations, we were able to bring it to a value of 0 in the green zone. So with these optimizations, we noticed a positive impact on our page. The first being that we improved the domain ranking and SEO ranking. So you can see here for Colombia, we noticed a percentage improvement of nearly 192%. We also noticed an improvement in our TTI score. So a quicker site also means that there is a greater chances of users converting as well. And finally, we were able to provide a better user experience altogether because we had less elements shifting on our page. So the visual stability of our page was much better. So over to you, Ankita, for the next topic.
Thank you, Pallavi. So coming to next web vital, which is LCP, or largest contentful paint. So what is LCP? LCP is basically a web performance metric that measure how long it takes to load the largest element. So for most of our websites, the largest element in the viewport is the one that users see first when they start their journey through the page. And that's the reason why LCP is currently considered as one of the essential rendering metrics, and Google has considered as one of the page experience factors. So LCP can be observed when the largest element is loaded initially, and that stays throughout. Also, there can be some element which contributes to LCP initially, but as and when the page loads, it becomes the second largest element. Only the visible elements like images, videos, textboards, and background images contribute to LCP, whereas the margin, padding, border doesn't really affect LCP. Coming to what's a good LCP score, anything that's below 2.5 seconds is considered to be good. Something that's between 2.5 seconds to 4 seconds needs improvement, and anything that's beyond 4 seconds is considered to be a poor LCP score. There are multiple ways of measuring LCP. Lighthouse Performance Tab, Page Speed Insights, and Chrome DevTools are some of the ways. We'll look at these with a quick demo towards the end of the presentation. Coming to what are the major LCP contributors, the first one is the use of unoptimized images. Larger the image sizes, more time it will be needed to load them, and that would negatively impact the vital. Next is the increased server response time. More time a server takes to respond to any of the client requests, more will be the LCP. The metric to measure this is TTFB, or time to first byte. Lastly, the use of render blocking resources. If at all we have any external scripts like JavaScript, CSS, or any other font libraries, HTML parsing gets paused, which in turn negatively impacts the vital. Coming to the ways as to how we can optimize LCP, the first is the use of optimized images. Image optimization can be achieved in multiple ways. The first one being image compression. Lesser the image sizes, lesser will be the load time. Also, we can try and use next-gen image formats like WebP, which gives us lighter images without any compromise on the quality. Also, if at all we have any hero images on our page, we can try to preload them. For improving the server response time, we can make use of caching DNS and service workers to cache any static content that's there on our page. Workbox strategies like cache first can be used to reduce the network cycles. We should also try and avoid use of external scripts for the initial load. But if at all it's needed, we can make use of pre-connect and preload keywords to form an initial connection with any third-party libraries that would be required for initial load. We can also try an inline critical CSS that needed for above the fold content. Rest of it can be deferred. Also, we must try to avoid using JavaScript to lazy load above the fold images. Over to you, Pallavi, for next vital.
Thanks, Ankita. So the last metric that we'll be discussing will be first input delay, FID. So first input delay measures the interactivity of your web page. So we could say from the time the user taps on the UI to the time the browser actually responds to that interaction. So we can see in this animation here that the user actually taps on some UI. The main thread is occupied for a certain amount of time. And once this main thread frees up, the page actually starts rendering. So a couple of examples that we have of interactions could be clicking on a link, choosing an option from a menu, and tapping on an accordion and it opening up. In terms of what a good FID score is, anything that is less than 100 milliseconds is considered to be good. Between 100 to 300 milliseconds needs improvement, and anything beyond 300 milliseconds is considered to be poor. So there are multiple causes for poor first input delay. So we'll go through a couple of them. The first thing is that you could have long tasks which are running on your main thread. So breaking up these tasks into smaller asynchronous tasks will help here. We basically delegated our work, some of the work, to web workers. So this meant that the JavaScript code was running on the worker thread instead of the main thread. Another cause could be heavy JavaScript execution. So here we utilize defer and async so that the code is executed only when it is required. And we also minimize the use of polyfills, which we were doing in order to deliver older functionalities on older browsers. We then have large JavaScript bundles. So these can delay how soon the script can be processed. So practicing things like code splitting will help here. So you will basically take your code and create various bundles and components so that they can be executed on load, on demand, or even in parallel. We then finally have render blocking JavaScript. So as soon as JavaScript code is encountered, your page rendering process is paused. So again, we saw this in the initial animation that we saw for FID. So if you have a JavaScript alert function, your page rendering will be paused as soon as the JavaScript code is encountered.
Coming to the optimizations that we tried out for reducing FID here at Red Bazaar. First is the optimizing DOM size. So instead of using heavy block elements, we can make use of inline elements. If we have like a long list of elements that like we have in our search page, we can make use of pagination and infinite scroll. Also, we can try to defer the non-critical resources like JavaScript, CSS, and any other external libraries. If at all we need it for initial load, we can make use of pre-connect and preload, and that would tell the browser to form a connection immediately. Minification of CSS files is another way to reduce first input delay. As Pallavi mentioned, we can also make use of web workers for any heavy UI computation or any process that tends to take longer time to keep the main thread unoccupied. Also, we must try to only load the minimum JavaScript that's required for initial rendering, and rest of the JavaScript chunks can be lazy loaded as and when needed. Once we tried out some of these optimizations, there was a positive impact that we observed. The first one being there was a significant improvement in the TTI, or time to interactivity, of the page and the speed index. Also, the total block time was reduced from 1.2 seconds to somewhere around 0.72 seconds. We also observed positive impact in the loading time of our Peru and Colombia mobile website by close to 1.5 to 2 seconds. Now we will look at a quick demo for measuring the web vitals. Over to you, Pallavi.
So as we mentioned earlier, one of the ways in which we can measure web vitals is with the help of Lighthouse, which is part of Chrome DevTools. So all you need to do is in your Chrome browser, open up the web page where you want to measure your web vitals, go to the Lighthouse tab and click on the Generate Report button. So on doing this, a few moments later, you'll be able to see an entire report that's generated for your web page. The first section will consist of all the different metrics. So you can see that some of the metrics that we discussed, like FCP, LCP, and CLS. There are also others like TTI and TBT as well, which is time to interact and total blocking time. On scrolling down further, you will see the different opportunities and diagnostics which will help us debug. So here you can see there are multiple sections. First up, we have avoid chaining critical requests. So this deals with FCP and LCP, and it will show you what resources are loaded with a high priority. We also have the largest contentful paint element. So here you can see the element that is contributing the most to our LCP score. We also have the avoid large layout shift section. So this again deals with CLS. And on the left-hand side, you'll see the element causing the CLS issue. And on the right-hand side, what its contribution is to our CLS score.
Coming to another way of measuring the Web Vitals, page speed insights. Once we come to this page, we just need to enter the URL of our application and click on Analyze tab. And this would bring up a report similar to this one, which speaks about the field data and the lab data scores. We also have two options of viewing the scores for our application for a mobile and a desktop view. So field data essentially talks about the scores that's collected by taking into account the user's experience, while the lab data talks about the scores collected from Lighthouse audits under control factors like network, device type, etc. It also speaks about the list of opportunities that can be utilized to help and make our page load faster. It also gives us a list of diagnostics, which essentially talks about the best web practices that can be utilized for a web development. It also has a list of filters, which when clicked upon will give the particular diagnostics and opportunities relevant to that vital. Going further down, we will see a list of diagnostic, which when clicked upon will give a detailed description of that particular diagnostic. Like this one we have for largest contentful paint, which tells about the element that's causing it. Also, we have a list of past audits, which will speak about all the audits that our website passed to achieve that particular score. So PageSpeed Insights and Lighthouse audits are some of the ways as to how we can measure the Core Web Vitals. There are a lot others. This was all about Core Web Vitals and how we can optimize them for a better user experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Pallavi and Ankita, for this detailed walkthrough on Core Web Vitals. It's really interesting to know that there are times when scoring a 0 is considered good. Usually that's not the case in real life, right? Folks, we'll be sharing all our learnings on how we have enhanced our products on browsers by improving Web Vitals. And we'll be sharing this, continue to share this outside of this webinar through our blogs and all our handles. Do keep an eye out for that. And while we are sharing our learnings, we would love to hear how these learnings have helped you improve your product pages on your browsers, whichever organization, whichever company you're working for. Now I'll kind of hand this over to Faiza and Apurva on the work we have done on monitoring and how it has helped us further our activity in improving the experience for our customers. Over to you, Faiza.
Thanks, Anup. Hi, all. So in the last 2 sessions, we have seen how we have optimized different aspects of our web application. Now, when this application is running in production, it is equally important that we are mindful of all the data that is flowing into and out of our system as well. Now, that's where observability comes into picture. So I'll start by briefing on what observability means. So by definition, observability of a system means that that particular system is aware about its internal states from its external outputs. Now, internal states here can mean anything from the health of the system, error rates occurring on the system, and other aspects of the system like latency, throughput, etc. So if a system is observable, just by how it's responding, we can tell how good or bad these aspects of the system are. Now, the below diagram shows all the major constituents of observability that we have explored. First one is logging. So if a web application is observable, then it means that there is a logging implemented on that system. So it will keep a track of all the data that is flowing into and out of the system. Now, the second is monitoring. So with the data that we have been logged, it will be put into a monitoring setup so that we can get to identify the performance of our system. So this will calculate all the major metrics on the of the performance and presents that data to us. Now, next aspect is visualization. So the data that we are logging will be in some raw format, right? So if we want to visualize that data better, we can organize that data into metric presentations, and we can have it in a custom dashboard. Now, if any issue happens on the system, like a high 5x6 alert occurs or a system downtime happens, with all these data, we'll be able to identify the issue that has happened and rectify it quickly. Now, tracing is one major constituent of observability that helps in this role. It helps in identifying the root cause of the issue in an efficient manner. So we'll talk about that in later on. Next, we'll look into what is the need for observability. So to understand that better, let's look into the below diagram. So as you can see, this is the request flow of our mobile web application. Now, this doesn't showcase all the microservices involved, but it will give you an idea of how complex the system can be. Now, say some issue happens on our mobile web application. Without having a deeper understanding of each of these microservices and deep knowledge like the data that we are collecting, we wouldn't be able to identify and quickly rectify which particular microservice is causing to the issue on the overall system. And if we do not rectify it quickly, it will keep impacting our customers, and ultimately it will escalate and impact our business as well. So we don't want that to happen, right? Hence, we have enabled observability on our systems. So with that, we have a greater visibility on each of the microservices involved in building this greater system. And with that, we'll have a greater understanding on the health of our system, errors occurring on the system, etc. And also the data that we are collecting, we can actually study the data and fine tune the performance of our system as well. Now, there are several aspects of observability that we have implemented at Redbus, but for the purpose of this webinar, we'll only focus on what's done on the browser front. So first, we'll look into real user monitoring or RAM in short form. So for any web application, it is important that we look into what our real users are viewing on the browser. So that's why we are making use of RAM. So whenever any of our users load in our web applications on any of the devices or browsers, RAM agent will also load. And what it does is it will keep collecting all the interactions of our users on the browser, and that data will be quantified, and it will give a score on the perceived performance of our application. Now we'll look into the demo of the RAM dashboard and what all matrices it is presenting us with. So as you can see, I've opened up for our mobile web application. There is a time filter, and also you can open it for any of the pages. Now, the first metric that you see is the page load metric. This is very crucial in determining the user engagement on any page. And there is a count on the backend and front-end segregation as well. Now, coming down, you have a detailed score on the core web vitals, LCP, FID, and CLS. So Ankita and Pallavi had explained these in detail. So you can get a quick glimpse of the score here as well. And if you see that the performance is poor, you can do further audits as they have explained and then fix the issues. Now, coming down again, we have further visualizations that directly relate to the page speed metric. And to the very bottom, we have a list of all the errors that our real users are facing. So these errors are collected from different devices, different like browsers and all. So this information is very helpful in identifying what is happening, and we can fix this to give them a better user experience. Next, we'll look into tracing. So while I explained all the constituents of observability, I mentioned that tracing is important in identifying root cause of an issue. So we'll look into that in detail. So so if we have tracing enabled on our system, then if for any transaction on our system, till it's completed, all the underlying requests associated with that transaction will be captured, and it will be presented in a good manner. So let's take this example here. So this particular trace sample is for the load of the seat layout page, and I've opened up only the client components of it. So as you can see, until the page is entirely loaded, all the network requests fired on that page will be highlighted here, like the CSS file load, JS file load, etc. And the time that each of these constituents require is also given here. Now, say if any issue happens on the load of this page, like say this particular JS file caused an issue by which the page went entirely blank or something. Now, if you want to debug it, you can quickly have a look into the trace sample. And this particular JS file will be highlighted as this is causing an issue, and you will be able to rectify that issue quickly. Now, next, let us look into the impact that RAM has created once we have integrated into our web applications. So the first one is that obviously developer productivity has improved. So earlier, whenever we were made aware of any issue, we would have to simulate it on that particular device and look into it, find the root cause, and then rectify it. But with the RAM data, we have all the information out of the box as shown in the dashboard earlier. And this helps us in identifying the issues quickly. And therefore, we don't have to spend much time in the debugging process. The second point is that we have a greater visibility into our user distribution, meaning that for every user coming into our system, we have a greater understanding as to which OS, browser, network combination each of our users belong to. So we were able to analyze this data, and we have been working on doing experiments and providing each of our users with a better user experience. The third one is quick turnaround on issues. So whenever we roll out a feature into production, we'll have to test it on multiple devices, right? So even when we do such kind of extensive testing and roll out that feature, maybe some user using a certain kind of device would have faced an issue, but we wouldn't get to know that particular issue until later in the production. But having the RAM data, as soon as the feature is rolled out, we'll get to see all the issues that our real users are facing. And hence, we can rectify those issues quickly without creating a much impact in production. The fourth one is that we were able to maintain custom dashboards. So how this helps is that we were able to relay the RAM data in a better format. And also we were able to push custom logs so that we can see it in a better way. So I'll take you through a quick example of the custom dashboard here. So as you can see, I've opened up for our mobile web application, and there is domain and funnel filters as well. Now, this particular dashboard presents you with information like network, share, browser type, etc. And coming down, you have details on the device-wise errors happening and the complete traffic in the system. Now, again, if you want to add additional information like the transactions occurring on the system, you can add that as well. Also, if you want to add custom logs so that you want to view for a particular use case, you can add that also here. So all these together has refined our process in identifying the issues that our users are facing. And hence we were able to fix these issues quickly and provide them with a better user experience. Now from here, we'll look into detail how we are doing error tracking at Redbus, as well as how we have done the anomaly detection and alerting setups as well. So Apurva will be taking on that from here.
Thank you, Faiza. So why do we need error tracking? To debug any issues that are happening, to understand why those issues are happening and analyze them, and to find any corner cases in the production. So for that, at Redbus, we have maintained a page-wise error log dashboard, which helps us in understanding different errors over a particular period of time. So this error dashboard, which you are seeing on the screen, shows us the errors for a particular period of time, and we can even filter it based on the URL, the domain, and it also tells us the script in which the error is occurring, and also the count of the occurrences of that error, so that we can fix critical errors as soon as possible. So if we take a look into a particular error, for example type error, we get to see the message, device in which the error has occurred, the OS in which the error has occurred, and many other details which can help us in analyzing. We can even filter it based on the domain in which it has occurred, so that we can concentrate on that particular domain as well as the page in which it has occurred. It also gives us information on the count of errors for a particular period of time or at a point of time, so that we can check when all this error is occurring and debug that as soon as possible. So other than the error dashboard, to track down errors and debug, we have error analysis system, which gives us the error rate, the last occurrence of that error, and the number of occurrences. So if we take a look into a particular error, we get to see the script in which the error has occurred, the occurrences of that error for a particular time. And if we go deep down into it, we get to see the transaction in which the error has occurred and the mobile agent in which it has occurred. We get to see the exact location of that error in the script and even other metadata that helps us in understanding the errors. So I have attached a screenshot showing the exact location of the error in the script. So taking a look into this, we get to see that cannot read property body of undefined was hit at line number 98 in common service script, maybe because data is coming as undefined. So this helps us developers to get to the exact point where the error is hit and debug it and fix it as soon as possible. So other than errors, there can be anomalies or variations from the expected flow or normal flow. So for that, we are using anomaly detection feature, which uses a machine learning model following unsupervised learning. And based on the configurations and data points provided, it predicts an anomaly score between 0 and 100. And if that anomaly score is above 75, then it is considered as critical. So the chart in here shows the request rates, and the chart also explains whenever the request rate has dropped significantly. The red spot in this chart tells us there is an occurrence of anomaly on 20th August 2021, and the anomaly score is 90, which is considered to be critical. We can even filter it based on the time period at which we require to see the anomaly occurrences. So do we developers always have to check this chart to understand anomalies or identify them? No, we have set alerts on the anomaly detection feature so that ML Watcher alert notifies us with an email telling us the job in which the anomaly has occurred, the time at which the anomaly has occurred, and the anomaly score. And it even tells us the transactions which has caused the anomaly, and also provide a link to the Anomaly Explorer. And on clicking that link, it takes to a dashboard, which gives us an overall view of the Anomaly Explorer. So as you can see, there are different color codes set for range of anomaly scores for better visualization and better understanding at a quick look itself, and that too for a particular period of time which we can filter it. It also tells us the transactions that are causing anomalies with their anomaly scores, and this helps us in understanding which all are the critical anomalies and resolve them as soon as possible. So with this, it reduces the load on developers to debug issues, to find anomalies and resolve them, and it also helps us in better development. And with observability, it helps us in improving the booking performance of the booking funnel and reduce issues happening in the production once they have gone live. So that's it for the observability. We come to the end of the session. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Faiza and Apurva. Literally being mindful of what is happening both internally and externally has really allowed us to get greater control on a complex system that is Redbus, essentially, and being able to monitor issues which people are facing real time has really helped us respond very, very quickly to ensure that the customers have a better experience. Folks, hope this session where we have spoken about the component library from Redbus, the core web vitals and observability, and how these has helped Redbus provide a better performing product on our browser ecosystem and a superior experience to our customers, has thrown some light, which can hopefully help all of you out there. I would again want to call out and thank Faiza, Apurva, Pallavi, Ankita, Kaushal and Anjali to kind of prepare all of this and take us through, and to a lot of people, including Amit, Jagdish, Gautam, Pritish on the back end, who has really been answering all your questions on LinkedIn. With that, we come to the end of this webinar. However, and these are the links, we'll be sharing it, as I said, to access to our blog, to the GitHub for our component library. Please keep do follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter at Redbus Tech. But before we go, as I said in the beginning, right, this is pretty much the first of the series of webinars. Very soon we would look at the part 2 of this, and where we will be trying to cover these topics. We will be announcing this soon, which is around understanding new browser capabilities and trying to give an experience on the browser, especially the mobile web browser, at par with an Android app or iOS app for that matter. Trying to capture a lot of the user side events and trying to use that data for a lot of analysis and further enhancement of the product. And there would be certain, we'll be also sharing some case studies which we have done on some of the things we spoke about today, including Web Vitals. So hope to see you all there again. And until the next time, wish you all the best. Stay safe, keep masked up, and get vaccinated so that all of us can be back to our regular lives as soon as possible.
Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for part 2.